You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1018. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I am so excited that you are here. We help you to build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. We're doing this show, depending on the week, 5 or 6 times a week. I think we're at 6 now. We have some amazing sponsors, amazing guests. We have a lot to say. And I've said this before, but I'm going to keep saying it. My report card from like first grade on always had Joey talks to his neighbor too much, and it was a negative thing. And my parents said, "Hey, you're doing good work in school, but you got to stop distracting people." Now I get paid to distract people and to talk about really interesting things, and I'm getting my work done at the same time. So I'm so excited to hang out with you today. I hope your private practice is going really well. As we talk about a thriving practice you absolutely love, we want you to be sustainable. We want you to be able to do big things. We also want you to love it. There's so many ways to make money in the world that a lot of them you might not like, and that's okay. There might be modalities that you don't like. There might be types of clients that you just don't feel like you're best, when you're working with that type of client. We want you to build that specialty so that you can be passionate and excited and serving the people in your community with you or your group practice so that you absolutely love it. So that's what we do here almost every day throughout the week. And there's tons of resources. Today, I am so excited that I'm going to have Kevin Cannella, who is the co-founder and executive director of Thank You Life and a MAPS-trained psychedelic psychotherapist. Kevin's been using non-ordinary states to help himself and others heal for 15 years. His life's work has been to help people align with their core values and to transform. His years of experience working with ketamine as a breakthrough tool for his clients' healing have shown him the power of psychedelics in the mental health arena. After 15 years of this type of work, Kevin's recognized the substantial financial obstacles that prevent most people from having access to the help they need. His intention for Thank You Life is to create a fund that can open up this treatment to the masses. And my attorney also wants me to remind y'all that we may be talking about things that are federally illegal. This is not an endorsement of that. We are talking about people's stories and the process of that. So make sure you consult with your own attorney before you follow anything we talk about today. Kevin, welcome to the Practice podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we did a huge series back in May, all around psychedelic-assisted therapy, had a great response to it, interviewed some really interesting people. And to me, this is a dialogue that needs to keep happening. And there's so many different angles we can take. And I'm excited to hear your story and talk about financial barriers and what that means. But let's just start with what got you into psychedelic-assisted therapy?
Yeah, good question. It's a bit of a long answer. I'll give you the short to medium version. So I had some really powerful psychedelic experiences during my time in undergrad, actually, and they sort of transformed the path that I was on and really helped me open up at first socially, but then eventually spiritually. At the time, I was actually would often say that I was technically agnostic, but pretty sure that I was atheist. But then, kind of by the end of my time at undergrad, I was just had this really strong spiritual pull, and it was so strong that by the end of my time when I was graduating, I really did not want to go into the corporate world. I was studying at Georgia Tech, and myself and many of my friends were becoming engineers, and um, I was studying business, and we were all just kind of readying ourselves for the corporate 9 to 5 thing. Um, and yeah, I was kind of so impacted by my own experiences that I really started looking elsewhere, and um, somehow ended up, after graduating, volunteering at an ayahuasca retreat center down in the Amazon called the Temple of the Way of Light. Um, so that launched me from recreational psychedelics that were giving me these like mystical experiences that I was just beginning to kind of understand what they were, into this whole realm of using psychedelics to heal ourselves, this idea of psycho spiritual emotional healing, what that was, what that meant. So that's what really launched me into ultimately what I would call psychedelic therapy. um,
Mm,
yeah, and so it was like a 6, 7, 8 year process from there, working with ayahuasca as a medicine to heal. um, I ended up being down in Peru for about 7.5 months, and then ended up spending the next 4 or 5 years in Hawaii. Actually, work trading on farms, finding more ayahuasca out there, and then really just deepening into a lot of spiritual practices, a lot of Vipassana meditation retreats, these really beautiful uh, 10-day silent meditation retreats, and really had the space in my life to just dive really deep into myself. Um, and then it was really coming out of that whole time period. So that was like 22 to 27, and yeah, around 27, I began emerging out of that, and was ready for something more, and felt like I had got the sort of depth and breadth of experiences that I was looking for, and wanted um, really to just start actualizing myself, in terms of my career, romantic relationships, just these aspects of adulthood that I didn't quite go into yet. Making money, uh, setting up being a provider just for myself at the very least. Um, yeah, based on this spiritual path that I took, psychotherapy really called to me, and I had begun using Western psychology to as like an adjunct to these more spiritual paths, and was fascinated by it. Thought I had a knack for kind of understanding it, and understanding how it worked. And so, yeah, the next step for me turned out to be going to Boulder and enrolling into Naropa for one of their counseling programs, graduate counseling programs.
mm. Now, during that phase before you started entering the counseling program, what shifts happened through psychedelics for you? Maybe like what are some things that were from childhood or early adulthood that you let go of or that you clung on to? Or like what did that transformation look like in your early adult life?
Yeah, wow, great question. Um, hmm, there was a lot for sure. I think the main thing that happened is that I I was able to let go of a lot of, call it like programming, from um, from society, and what I thought the like the goal of life was, and what I thought the sort of boundaries of like what a life can be. I think this period helped me really expand my horizons in terms of what might be possible for myself and my life. And I think the biggest piece is it helped me reorient uh, my focus. Um, and what I mean by that is, uh, I don't really know what my focus was before this, other than um, you know, I think a lot of sort of mainstream things that people often want, the cool car, the the great life partner, the great job, money, and nothing's wrong with any of these things, and I'm still actively trying to have a fulfilling life here on Earth, but my orientation began to shift away from that and more toward um, more spiritual things, finding happiness within, regardless of circumstance, and and really working to understand how my mind uh, created tension, created distortion, and created disharmony, and to try to free myself from those things.
Mm. Now, tell me where Thank You Life came in. Like, where did the idea come in? What kind of barriers were you seeing? I mean, like looking at your website, I love how you use both numbers and stories on it. Like, I'm looking at it right now, real data from what you funded since 2022, like 66% drop in depression symptoms, 65% down in anxiety, 70% down, over 200K in scholarships. Like, doing really amazing work. But how did this start? Like, what problem did you see? And then how and why did you take action on it? Because a lot of people see problems and then they just complain about it and don't take action.
Mm,
So,
mm.
what did you see? And then how did that lead to actually starting something?
Totally, totally. So, going into Naropa, I like while I was applying to Naropa, I actually heard on the Tim Ferriss podcast about MDMA assisted psychotherapy. Um, and then, that just kind of carried with me all throughout my time at Naropa. And when I got there, uh, some of the staff so Boulder was one of the locations where they were doing their phase 2 trials, and some of the staff at Naropa um, were holding meetings for some of the students who wanted to get a bit more involved and understand what was happening. And so um, I kind of just landed at one of the sort of epicenters of this work. And by the time I graduated, I started hearing about ketamine being what's here now, and the only really kind of even though it's not technically a psychedelic, the only real version of psychedelic therapy that we have at the moment. And so when I graduated, I had a very clear uh, intention that I wanted to get into private practice and get into psychedelics, and I didn't exactly know what that meant. Um, but I spent the next couple years building up my practice and becoming a ketamine therapist, and did a ketamine training, did some trauma trainings, did MAPS MDMA training that you referenced, and eventually started seeing ketamine clients in my private practice. And here's where the whole piece with Thank You Life comes in. Um, it was beautiful work to get to help people through ketamine, and wow, was it amazing to just that was all being done above board after uh, you know doing all these things that either had to be done outside the United States or um, just in underground sort of scenarios, to be helping people uh, in my with a license in my office, and they have a ketamine prescription from the doctor that I'm partnering with. It was really amazing, and yet there's this financial barrier, um, and compared to a lot of the ketamine clinics out there, what I was doing in my private practice was also quite cheap, and still about 80-90% of the population, the US population, is priced out. And so very quickly, there just became this conversation among myself and a lot of my colleagues who were also engaged in the ketamine work about, wow, like we were almost joking with each other, like, wow, wouldn't it be great if there was just some fund that we could plug into and not have to worry about doing sliding scale with people? Um, and so that's where like the seed of the idea for me really originated. And then, you know, kind of with this whole like life path that I shared a little bit of, I really have just been trying to follow my guidance, and trust that life will sort of bring me to the next right place. That's just been a bit of my own spiritual practice. And the next step that emerged actually came from one of my own journeys. And I got this really strong intuition: go start this fund and go start it now. um, and the sort of idea around it, like, there was some reasoning that kind of came in afterwards that was like, go start go start this fund now, and that by the time MDMA comes online federally, psilocybin comes online federally, we'll be an established organization, and we won't be, um, running around trying to like create something out of nothing very quickly. And so, that was back in 2021, and a lot of that year was spent researching what it's like to start a nonprofit, et cetera. I partnered up with my co-founder, Dr. Dan Engel, and he has his own story, but essentially had the same idea. The inspiration for him actually came from a client who was in a ketamine session, took their eye mask off, and kind of shot up and looked at him and was like, "You need to start a fund for other people to get this work." And then like put the eye mask back on, went back into their session. And yeah, obviously he was struck by that, and sort of followed those breadcrumbs himself. So by the time I reached out to him, I think it was just a nice synchronistic moment for the both of us. And we were both at the exact same place too. We both had a website up, that stated the mission. Neither of us had incorporated anywhere, but just had a website up as kind of step one. And so we were both like, "Oh wow, this is really interesting." And I think, just step by step, we decided to work together, and try to build something out.
Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Love to shift into, so when you look at some of the stats in regards to access, like what are you seeing in regards to who has access, who doesn't, like average cost of things? And you may not have the exact stats, but just like anything you can speak to as to the problem of access to psychedelic assisted therapy.
I think there's a few different factors here. So, and this really gets into a wider conversation of health equity. So the first factor is cost, and this is the main factor that we at Thank You Life are trying to do something about. Um, yeah, I would say, it really ranges based on where you're at in the world or in the country. But I would say in general, we're looking at like $5,000 to $10,000. Could be a little bit less, could be a little bit more than that. But for most people, a full ketamine treatment, which will be 4 to 8 sessions, let's say, will typically fall in that sort of range. Um, some people can get it for as little as say 3,000. But yeah, then some places in big cities where there's a higher cost of living, you might be looking more at like 10 to 12,000. And so again, even if we just take the shorter or like the lower end of this, $3,000 out of pocket is just really not possible for a lot of people. I think, what is it, like over half the U.S. population doesn't have like $1,000 emergency fund. Um, and so what gets set up is that this just finances alone, this becomes something for the privileged, in this case, the financially privileged. Then I think there's also just additional barriers. There's for some communities, there's a lot of stigma around mental health still. For the U.S. population in general, there's still some stigma around psychedelics. Um, for a colleague of mine, she's working to help educate uh, like a lot of like what are they called, like general practitioner doctors. So you're the primary physician that you go see. If you don't know about ketamine or psychedelics, and if your community has stigma around ketamine and psychedelics, and then it's really just up to your doctor to know about this treatment for you to find out that it exists and that it could be really effective for you. And then if your doctor doesn't know about it, then where's the access point for you? Where's the place where you're going to find out that this treatment exists? Where, and it's not for everybody, but to go even see if it might be something that's for you, you need to hear about it somewhere. So there's just a lot of these places where, again, there's the financial piece, but then there's also just like, how does somebody even hear about it if their doctor doesn't know about it, if their community has stigma around it, and if they don't know about it? So then it just becomes, I don't know what kind of, like, how you would encapsulate that, but yeah, there's like a special privileged group of people who happen to know about these things, um, and have the like time and resources to go explore alternative treatments, or have heard about a friend going to do some psychedelic therapy somewhere, um, and they hear about it through that, and otherwise they just don't know that it exists.
Mm. So when you saw those problems and you start the nonprofit, like how does that actually look? Like I'm thinking about there's there's so much kind of financial equity going into and like kind of big investments going into psychedelics. Like how do you prevent these donations from like just going to people that are overcharging people or like just going to big pharma or like how have you guys thought through those things, because I imagine that you've thought through like we want to make sure this we get the biggest bang for our buck from our donors. Like how have you thought through those kinds of things?
Yeah, good question. So one of the first steps was to begin to build out our provider network. Um, and I would say by and large, although some people charge a lot of money for this therapy, I don't really see people overcharging. Um, that, like, yeah, I mean, some of our clinics have a lot higher price point, but it's because they're in the middle of San Francisco, or different places like this where the cost of living is really high. And I've had conversations where they're like, yeah, this is our price point. If we go lower than this, it's going to be very difficult for us to stay in business. Um, and so I really trust the practitioners that, none of them are becoming millionaires and trillionaires by starting a ketamine practice. And they're, you know, they're here to make a good living for themselves and really to help heal as many people as they can, often because they've had their own healing. And so, I mean, that's just one piece of what I would say about that. And I would say we have such a robust vetting process. And one of the biggest pieces to that is to really ensure that the clinicians are well trained and that the clinic itself is doing CAP, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and is not just a ketamine infusion center that might leave somebody in the room by themselves, or I just heard of an example where a nurse is basically monitoring like 4 ketamine clients all at once in different rooms. Um, I think there's some space for a group model where people do ketamine in a group and have a group experience. But um, I think the biggest thing that we are trying to look out for is the sort of corporatization of psychedelic therapy, and how much that just dilutes um, the core experience. Um, where yet, if I'm going through my process and there is a nurse who I get 25% of that nurse's attention, um, that's just so different than being in the room with a therapist where I get 100% of that therapist's attention. And that therapist really knows me and my story. So there's context when I share about what's coming up for me in the session. And yeah, so those are some of the things that we look out for.
Yeah. Well, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Yeah, I I appreciate the question for the specific audience too, and I think what I would say to therapists at large, practitioners at large, is we're well aware that this is not for everyone, and it is absolutely changing some people's lives. Um, People's PTSD symptoms are going away. Sometimes, a lot of the times with ketamine, after one session, a huge amount of their depressive symptoms can go away. And that change is not always permanent, but it is such an amazing start for somebody who's been chronically depressed for 2 years to all of a sudden have that depression lift for even a few weeks. And there's so much that can be done with the right um, amount of therapy and support to help that person heal. So I would say, by and large, as a field and as a community of psychedelic therapists, we get that these things are not magic pills, um, but they do offer an opportunity for tremendous change that often cannot be touched with just talk therapy. So I would say that, and I would say, like, I think a big piece of what we need is just for all of us to get more educated about these things. So if you're interested, maybe go to a training with Polaris or Prati or the Ketamine Training Center. Um, and yeah, otherwise, just do what you can to stay informed and keep an open mind to what these really transformational medicines and therapies have to offer to us as a field.
Hmm. So awesome. Kevin, if people want to connect with you, if they want to donate, where should we send them?
Yeah, please go check out thankyoulife.org, thankyoulife.org/donate. One thing that's really great is just a monthly donation. If you feel like you can give something even like $10, $25 a month, that can do so much for us and the people that we're helping. Um, right now, we have about uh, basically like every 100 people that give monthly, we get to help another person. And so it can really make a difference quickly if we work in mass here. And otherwise, if you have any questions or interest in what we're doing, feel free to email me at kevin@thankyoulife.org. We also have a contact on our website that you can fill out. We always love hearing from people, their stories. We always love hearing, people that want to help in a volunteer capacity. Um, and also clinicians. We love hearing from clinicians who are doing this work because we partner with y'all. And yeah, right now we partner with 80 ketamine clinics all over the US, and we're always looking to expand that. So if you are a psychedelic practitioner, yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Mm, so awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Well, if you missed the series we did back in May, make sure you head over there. Those were episodes. Let me just glance real quick. They kicked off on episode 989, and so covered everything from MDMA, psilocybin retreats, running groups with psilocybin and ketamine, ibogaine, some MAPS trainees, ayahuasca, politics around it, all sorts of things around access. So a lot of things that we covered during that series that kicked off in episode 989. So if you missed that, make sure you go back to that. Also, we had our Movers and Shakers series earlier this summer of some big hitters that were working in the White House and helped start something called Goop Lab. So we covered a lot of really interesting things earlier in the summer. Today's episode was sponsored by Gusto. Gusto is who we use for our payroll solutions. I absolutely love it because it helps do all the taxes and file everything, and I don't have to worry about having a whole accounting team or bookkeeping team that's doing that payroll. So try gusto.com/Joe. You're going to get 3 months totally free. It's going to help you with your payroll and so many other things like doing open enrollment, filing payroll taxes, calculating paychecks, all that sort of stuff you can do with Gusto. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.